wonderful individual. I was going to talk with you, and these lights are doing something in my glasses, about how older people are discriminated against. I was, about a year before last, came into my school, and plastered all over the walls were signs that my students had put up, and they had 75 and still alive. And so I thought, well, that's really neat. And then later, 4 of them came rushing into my office, and they said, "Oh, Miss, I'm so glad that you're still here. We were driving down I-10, and we saw this Amber Alert, and it said, missing elderly female, and we were so afraid it was you." So when I was thinking of a topic that I might talk with you about, that's what I thought about. But then I love the Finley presentation on Thoreau and marching to a different drummer. And those of you who know me know that I've always marched to a different drummer. And I think about things that I think some people may not think about. So I decided what I wanted to do today was to give you a challenge and dare you to disturb the sound of silence. It was on November the 22nd in 1963 that John F. Kennedy, the President of our United States, was assassinated. I only see 1 or 2 in here who might have been alive then. But I can tell you that there was an awful sound of silence when that happened. I remember distinctly that I was walking down the hallway to go to my classroom, and someone came up and said to me, "President Kennedy has been assassinated." I was just in shock. I walked into the classrooms, and all the kids were looking at me, and I could not open my mouth. I couldn't say anything. And I thought that maybe it was just the way it affected me. And then when I got home, nobody was talking. Nobody was saying anything. Everybody was glued to a TV, watching the event over and over and over. And I called my mother in Louisiana, and she wouldn't talk to me. She said, "I can't talk." And I don't know why I thought I could talk, because I really couldn't. I just thought I'd feel some safety in talking to her. There was just an enormous sound of silence that went on not just for that day or week, but extended on. And if you'll recall, in 1968, his brother was assassinated, and there was silence again. And then we went on to Dr. Martin Luther King, who was assassinated, and there was still more silence. There was a young boy after Kennedy's assassination who went into his bathroom, closed the door, there were no towels in the bathroom, and he turned off the light, and he wrote these words. It was Paul Simon. And he said, "In the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking. People listening without hearing. People writing songs that voices never shared. For no one dared disturb the sound of silence." And I think actually Paul Simon was predicting what was going to carry on after that event in 60, up until the present day. In 2000, there was a book written by Robert Putman, who talked about, the name of the book was Bowling Alone, and he talked about how we used to bowl in teams. We used to have leagues that bowled. And he talked about how we don't do that anymore. And I thought about, there was a time that I was in 5 bridge clubs, and I don't know of any bridge clubs anymore. Now maybe it's because I was a lousy player, they don't invite me, but I'm not really aware of a lot of bridge clubs. I was saying that in our school the other day, and this lady came up and she said, "Oh, I know a retirement center where they still play bridge. You might want to go over and talk to them." So obviously there are still bridge players, but we know that people are not joining clubs the way they once did. He talked about the PTA. I remember when I was a young teacher, everybody belonged to the PTA. I mean, anyone who was anyone was a member of the PTA. And if we went to a PTA meeting, it was packed. Everybody was there. They even wrote a country western song about Harper Valley PTA. They had one in Harper Valley, wherever that is. And so everybody was now the membership is really diminished significantly. In our school, it's hard to get a quorum to come to PTA meetings. They just don't join much anymore. And the national membership is very, very low. He described how the NAACP had lost members, and now there are not nearly as many members in that organization as there were at one time. Now, he gives several reasons why he believes that happened. One, he says, is the pressures of time and money. We just don't have the time to really get to know each other. When I heard Tommy say, "You have everything in your pocket that you need," I immediately thought of Barbra Streisand singing, "People, people who need people." And I was thinking, you know, maybe we have those in our pockets, and that's wonderful, but we still need each other. We need to belong to a group or to somebody. I heard a story about one of our teachers who said, I was discussing this with him, and he said, "I know when a communication broke down in my neighborhood, that they had once had chain link fences. And then all the neighbors would talk. He'd talk to the people on his left and right and the ones behind him. They would barbecue together. And then suddenly they started erecting those 7-foot board fences. And he said there was dead silence after that. They never communicated. And then I had a friend who, after her son David, his fence blew down. I blew it down. And he suddenly discovered he had someone living behind him that he really liked. And so they worked together to build the fence back, and they put a door in it. I guess it would be called a gate if it's outside. So now they go through that gate and they carry on this communication that was lost until they realized that each other happened to be in the same neighborhood. But I think that one of the things we can't take for granted is just because we have all this technology and we can communicate with anybody anywhere, that we don't need each other. Besides the pressure of time, Putman says that there is also a problem of urban sprawl, commuting to and from work for long periods of time, and people just don't feel like talking. They get to the office and they're isolated in a cubicle. They get home and they're isolated in their home. There's not as much communication going on with other people as there once was. He also said there's a generational change. And if any of you are in schools, I do not have a student, I don't think, in our school who doesn't have all this technology. And so they're more interested in that than they are in getting to know people and communicating with people. And the last one is this explosion of technology that Putman says affects the social isolation of individuals. All of this technology is absolutely wonderful, and we know the benefits of it, but it's been so rapidly changing that it's been impossible for anyone to do a real analysis of it, to know exactly how it affects us as human beings or how it affects us physically and emotionally. But why is it that we need to be sociable? Why is it that we need other people? Well, let's look at the psychology of it. I read an article that said, it was done at the University of Michigan recently, that said just talking to another individual actually increases our memory, and it causes us to do better on written tests. And that's important. We have long known that sometimes depression results from social isolation. And we have also known that it affects us not only psychologically, but emotionally. One of my grave concerns about what happens to people is that there are studies that indicate when there is very little social interaction, that it appears to negatively affect empathy, the development of empathy. And when we don't develop empathy, we have a possibility of losing our moral compass, as well as, in addition to that, encouraging violence. And all of us know that violence is increasing today in Houston. So those are the psychological reasons. Now, what about physical? I'll bet you didn't know this. Are you aware that social isolation is a predictor of mortality to the same degree that cigarette smoking is? And that has been known actually since the 70s and 80s. We read it over and over. The fact is, people don't pay that much attention to it. Also, it has been well documented that our genes are directly and related and predisposed to social interaction, and our well-being is as well. Simply put, the less social interaction we have, the less efficient our genes operate. Our genes are then connected to our immune system. And you know what the immune system does. It could either strengthen or weaken our body physically. So we know already that coronary disease is caused by social interaction. A recent study in Ohio stated that after a heart attack, if there's a support system, this was from Dr. Oz, by the way. You know he has to be right, he's on Oprah. But anyway, he says that after a heart attack, if you have a support system, that the brain damage is lessened. It's less than those who don't have that support system. He also says that when there is a traumatic event that happens in our lives, such as the loss of a child, a divorce, a financial difficulty, that we could lose as much as 7 years. That could take 7 years off our life. However, he says that if we have a strong support system, that it diminishes that to 1 year. So I think all of those things are really significant. And in addition to that, recent studies have pointed out that it could be, social isolation could be related also to the development of cancer. Now, I happen to think all these things are important. And Paul Simon then said, "Fools, said I, they do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my hand that I might reach you. But my words like silent teardrops fell and echoed in the well of silence." I think it's extraordinarily important that we spend time with other human beings. All the technology that we have, none of it permits us to reach out and touch, nor does it permit us to look in the eyes, which are the windows of the soul, of another human being. We need to build understanding. I had an occasion recently. I happen to have 13 identified gangs on our campus. And recently I had an occasion to play explorer, and I guess that what I was doing was climbing the craggy mountain and sliding down the rushing rivers of their souls and minds. And I listened to them. And it was really interesting what they told me. Because I said, why do you join gangs? What is it that causes you to do that? Well, at first they did not talk to me. But after we spent some time and I kept talking with them and asking them questions, but mostly listening to them, what they said was, "Miss, they're the only people who understand me. Who else understands us? We don't even have a chance to talk to other people. We only talk to our members in our gang. And then they said, they have our backs. They know us and they have our backs. And so I said, well, what about the people outside your gang? And I think this is really important because I read this last week that Houston has the most gangs now of any city in the state, which is not surprising since we're the largest city. But nevertheless, what they said was, I said, what about empathy? And they said, miss, I don't know what empathy is. So I talked to them about what empathy is. And they said, we don't have that. We have that for our gang members and for our families. But we don't have that for other people outside our gang. So I talked with them about empathy and how important it was. And they said, well, it's just that nobody understands us. And I think that Oscar Wilde said it, I've had a terrible cold, so excuse me. Oscar Wilde said it better than anyone has said it. He said, run your fingers through my soul. Feel the way I feel. Believe as I believe. Perceive as I perceive. Look, examine, explore. And for once, just this once, understand. We need to take time to understand. And to do that, we need to interact face to face with other human beings. Thank you so much.